And I'm going to be debating Mike. Mike, I really hope you have proof and evidence that atheism is actually correct, because the atheists never have any. I'm debating Mike, and the topic of the debate is, does God exist? Tonight's debate, I'm going to defend two basic contentions. Number one, there are good reasons to think that God exists. And number two, there are no good reasons to think that atheism is true. So I'm going to leave it up to Mike to present his arguments against the Christian God's existence. Mike, I want to hear your arguments for atheism. We don't want to hear about Santa Claus, teapots, or unicorns like you guys always talk about. We want adult arguments, please. Now, as an ex-atheist myself, I know that God makes sense of a wide range of data of human experience, scientific, moral, and historical considerations. So let's look at the origin of the universe, guys. First of all, the atheists used to claim that the universe was just eternal and uncaused. The Christians have always claimed that the universe had a beginning. So I like true science. I don't like atheistic science. A lot of it is just, mumbo jumbo. So we do know whatever begins to exist has a cause. The universe began to exist, therefore the universe has a cause. So the cosmological argument really favors Christianity. It doesn't favor atheism. You have to have a cause that is not a material cause. The cause must be uncaused, timeless, changeless, and this meets exactly the definition of the values that God would have. The problem is atheists want to say nothing did it, and the atheists are guilty of nothing of the gaps. Also, I want you guys to notice that we've been asking atheists over and over to provide some proof and evidence that atheism is accurate and correct, and I asked Mike earlier, he wasn't able to do it. He failed in epic fashion. He was not able to prove that atheism is accurate and correct. So we talked about the cosmological argument. Whatever begins to exist has a cause. The universe began to exist, therefore it has a cause. This clearly goes more on the side of God's existence than it does on atheism. Anthony Kinney of Oxford University says if someone's an atheist, they got to believe that the universe came from nothing and by nothing. But that's just stupid. But then again, so is atheism. Now, let's talk about what I think is awesome is the, well, let's talk about objective moral values, because that's, everyone always like to talk about that, and I may go to the fine-tuning. Objective moral values also adds more weight to the side of God's existence than it does on atheism. On atheism, we're all just animals, they say, so on atheism, there would be no good or evil. But the fact that Mike admits that rape is objectively evil, and Mike, I want to know when you get on the mic if you are willing to state the fact that rape is objectively evil. The fact that we have things that are evil and good shows that objective moral values and duties are in the world. But if God does not exist, then objective moral values and duties would not exist. And by objective moral values, guys, we mean values which are valid and binding whether people believe in them or not. For example, to say what Hitler did when he murdered all the Jews was objectively wrong and evil is to say that it was evil even if you were Hitler himself. And many theists and atheists agree that if God does not exist, then moral values and duties are not objective in this sense. The problem, though, is on an atheistic, naturalistic view, moral values, they'll tell us, are just the byproduct of biological evolution and social conditioning. Just like baboons will exhibit cooperative and self-sacrificial behavior because natural selection has determined it to be advantageous in the struggle for survival. So atheists will say, and that's exactly why their primate cousins, Homo sapiens, they've developed similar behavior for the same reason. The problem, though, is on the atheistic view, atheism's so evil that it won't come out and admit that rape is objectively wrong. Let's see if Mike's willing to admit it. See, on the atheistic view, there's nothing really wrong with raping someone. On the evil atheistic view, there's nothing that makes morality objectively binding and true. Certain actions, as I mentioned, such as rape, may not be socially advantageous, atheists will try to convince us of, and that's why they become taboo. But like I mentioned, atheism does absolutely nothing to show that rape is wrong. Such behavior also, guys, goes on all the time in the animal kingdom, and given atheism, the rapist who chooses to flout the herd morality is doing nothing more serious than acting unfashionably, like a dude that goes to like a wedding and wears white socks with tennis shoes and a tuxedo. He's not doing anything evil or wrong on atheism. He's just out of step with the herd. But that leads to our second premise. Objective moral values and duties do exist. And in moral experience, we apprehend a realm of moral values and duties that impose themselves upon us. Louise Anthony, she's a woman atheist. She was in a debate, and she also agreed that objective moral values exist. Here's what she said. She said, quote, any argument for moral skepticism is going to depend upon premises which are less obvious than the reality of objective moral values themselves. And that woman's an atheist, and she admits objective moral values exist. So guys, actions like rape, cruelty, racial hatred, and child abuse, they're not just subjective behavior, they're truly evil. Michael Roos also admits it. The man who says it's morally acceptable to rape is just as mistaken as the man who says 2 + 2 = 5. Some things at least are truly evil, and atheism is evil. But then it follows logically and inescapably, number 3, that therefore God exists. And have you guys ever noticed that another thing evil about atheism is they always bash God. They spend so much time bashing God, but then they want to convince us that he doesn't exist. Yet they never bash Satan. Don't you think that's kind of curious? I guess you just don't bash your father, do you, atheist? It's rude to bash your father. So let's go to the historical facts concerning Jesus of Nazareth, and I'm winding down my arguments. Now, our case so far gives us a generic monotheism affirmed by Jews, Christians, and Muslims alike, but do we know anything more about who this God is? Well, let's answer that question by looking at the person of Jesus of Nazareth. The historical person, Jesus of Nazareth, is a remarkable individual on all accounts. And historians have reached something of a consensus that Jesus came on the scene with an unprecedented sense of divine authority, the authority to stand and speak in God's place. He claimed that in himself the kingdom of God had come, and as visible demonstrations of this fact, he carried out a ministry of miracle working and exorcisms. But the supreme confirmation of his claim was his resurrection from the dead. Most people may think that the resurrection of Jesus is something you just believe in by faith or not, but there's actually 3 facts that are recognized by the majority of New Testament historians, even liberal New Testament historians, which I believe are best explained by the resurrection of Jesus. Fact 1. On the Sunday after his crucifixion, Jesus' tomb was found empty by a group of his women followers. Fact 2. On separate occasions, different individuals and groups saw appearances of Jesus alive after his death. And fact 3. The original disciples suddenly came to believe in the resurrection of Jesus despite having every predisposition to the contrary. And you know, guys, attempts to explain away these 3 great facts like, well, the disciples just stole the body, you know how atheists say that sometimes, or, well, maybe Jesus wasn't really dead. Look, guys, they've all been universally rejected by contemporary scholarship. The simple fact is there's just no plausible atheistic, naturalistic explanation of these 3 facts. So it seems to me that the one that it has the most explanatory scope is the fact that the God revealed by Jesus of Nazareth had raised Jesus from the dead. And so we have a good inductive argument for the existence of God based on the resurrection of Jesus. Now, let's talk about the ontological argument. It is possible that a maximally great being exists. And, well, we'll get back to that because I want to talk about premise 1. If it is possible that a maximally great being exists, then a maximally great being exists in some possible world. And if a maximally great being exists in some possible world, then it exists in every possible world. And if a maximally great being exists in every possible world, then it exists in the actual world. If a maximally great being exists in the actual world, then a maximally great being exists. Therefore, it follows that a maximally great being exists. Now, the problem is it just seems rational and logical to believe that it is possible that a maximally great being exists. And Mike admits that it is possible that the Christian God exists. So in order for him to try to debunk the ontological argument, he has to give arguments against the existence of the Christian God even being possible. But Mike, I don't know how you're going to do it. I would like to hear some arguments against God's existence. Unless and until he does that, theism's still just going to be ruling the world. What is it? 97% of the world are theists, while a little paltry 3% of the world are atheists, you see. Now, and also premises 2 through 5 of the argument are relatively uncontroversial. Most philosophers agree that if God's existence is even possible, then he must exist. So the atheist in debate must give arguments, good arguments, not Santa Claus, leprechaun, unicorns like you guys do, but good arguments, adult arguments, not childish ones like you guys tend to give. Good arguments against God's existence. But the problem, guys, is it's been centuries and centuries, and atheists have tried for centuries to give some type of good arguments against God's existence, but they've all failed. They've never been able to show that God does not exist. Okay, I also, wrapping it up, I want to talk about how we have a mind. Atheists will try to say that we're just atheist flesh blobs. The fact that you have a mind, you have free will, shows that there's something else there besides the natural world. And if there's something else there besides the natural world, this also goes against atheist naturalism. I would like to bring up that the Atheist Experience Show has now admitted on video, if you go to shockforever.com, you can see the video, they've admitted that Jesus Christ's resurrection, you're going to hate this, atheist, is possible. They've admitted it is possible. And given the ontological argument, it doesn't look too good for atheism. It's pretty bad when on an atheist show the evidence is so overwhelming that they're admitting that Jesus Christ's resurrection is possible. We also have proof and evidence with ghost and demonic activity. I was doing a debate the other night with about 30 people in the room, and half the room said they have experienced ghost and demonic activity. This is not dirt or matter or rocks or stone. This is something spiritual. This shows that there's something there that is not from the natural realm. This goes also against atheist naturalism. We talked about objective values, the cosmological argument. I'm going to also talk about the teleological argument. And the teleological argument is amazing. You guys know that our Earth is perfectly balanced. I mean, we're literally balanced on a razor's edge. The universe was fine-tuned for our existence here on this planet. And so there's a little over, I would say, 30 of these life-permitting constants. I have them all listed at ShockofGod.net. And if you were to change one of these just a hair's breadth, life on this Earth would not exist. There's only 3 possible explanations for this remarkable fine-tuning: dumb luck and chance, physical necessity, or design. We know it's not due to dumb luck and chance because the odds of all these things being due to dumb luck or chance, it's just too irrational to say that. The atheist would have to convince us it's not 1, not 2, not 3, not 5, not 10, not 15. But over 30 of these life-permitting constants are all the product of dumb luck or chance. I don't think so. And but if the atheist wants to go there, I can show that it's not due to dumb luck or chance. I hope he goes there. But it's not due to dumb luck or chance. Well, what about physical necessity? Scientists have already shown, and also cosmologists have shown, that there's no reason for these constants to be this way. They're just arbitrary. They don't have anything to do with natural law. It's like an intelligent mind made them this way. The only other logical thing we can think of is design. Since the fine-tuning of the universe is not due to dumb luck or chance, and we also know it's not due to physical necessity, it follows rationally that the fine-tuning is therefore due to design, which is another wooden stake in the heart of atheist naturalism. Look at DNA, which is empirical proof of design. Go to ShockofGod.net, click Music Podcast, and look how DNA is a language. It is impossible for it to evolve. It can evolve. It is information. So the evolutionists like Richard Dawkins and well, Christopher Hitchens is dead now, but a lot of these guys, they are stumped. They can't explain how this information got there. Francis Crick, who was the co-discoverer of DNA, he talks about it almost being a miracle, and he doesn't believe that it is the process of evolution here. He believes that, he goes, it's got to be a miracle or something seeded this planet. You know, it's not here by Darwinian evolution. Another problem is that atheists have no objective purpose in life at all. So the fact that Mike's here debating me shows that he really knows that atheism's a bunch of crap. Why debate if there's no objective purpose to life? So Mike, I think you just proved that atheism's a bunch of crapola because you're here investing your time debating when on atheism there really is no objective purpose in life. So the fact that Mike's here debating me is very good weight on my side of the debate that in reality he wants an objective purpose in life. And the Christians have an objective purpose in mind. Also, 150 million brutal murders, rapes, and atrocities under the evil atheist regimes of Stalin, Pol Pot, Mao. I don't know how someone could be an atheist. I'd be ashamed to be an atheist. Near-death experiences also are empirical damage against atheist naturalism. And then, of course, the atheist cannot give a good argument or defeat her against the Christian's experiential reality. The Christians experience reality. Princess is in the room, and the other night she was talking to an atheist. She goes, unless you can convince me that, she was saying that, you know, that Christians are just crazy and deluded as they experience God in their lives, then you are rational to be a Christian. You have to provide a defeater that would show our experiential reality is false. Then we also have the prophecies that came true. I mean, guys, I can go on and on with the proof and evidence on the side of God's existence. There is no proof and evidence that atheism is true. We have prophecies that came true. The 1948 prophecy where it was prophesied that Israel would be gathered again to herself as a nation. Also look at the prophecy, the Isaiah prophecy, which clearly talks about Jesus Christ, his death on a cross, with his stripes we are healed, how they gambled for his clothes. So let's go through the arguments I went through, and then I'm going to turn it over to Mike. And Mike, be prepared to provide proof and evidence that would show that God does not exist, that atheism is true. We talk about the mind, ghost, demonic activity, objective values, cosmological argument, teleological argument, ontological argument, Jesus Christ, prophecies, near-death experiences, experiential reality, DNA, and how atheists really have no objective purpose in life, but the Christian does. And we talked about the very evils that have come from atheism. Over 150 million brutal murders, rapes, and atrocities under the evil atheist regimes. We talked about how the atheist experience show admitted that Jesus could have resurrected from the dead. Can you see why atheism is declining worldwide as a whole? 97% of the world are theists, only 3% are atheists. So I'm going to get off the mic. Mike, I'd like to wish you all the luck in the world in giving us some reasons why we should believe God doesn't exist. Unless and until Mike can do that, I think we know that Christianity is the more rational, plausible position.
Thank you for the introduction, Shock. Although I am slightly resentful that we took an hour and a half to get to this point. Now, you suggested that you would be defending two things. That there are good reasons to think that God exists and that there are no good reasons to think that atheism is true. Naturally, I will attempt to counter both of these. We'll start with your first claim and deal with them in that order. Firstly, that we believe in an eternal universe until very recently, when science shifted in the direction of Christian theology. Firstly, this is an appeal to ex nihilo creation, ignoring the pre-Socratic philosophers. As I'm sure all of you are aware, Socrates predates Christianity. However, we go slightly further than this. Dismissing claims of an eternal universe does nothing to relate to claims of the cause of the universe. For example, Hawking proposes a phi wave. Now, whilst this is yet to be proven, it is an equally valid option as God. As neither have been proven, Neither are arguments in favor of either party. You moved on rather swiftly from this to objective moral values, an interesting position for a believer in God to take, as I will explain. You believe that whatever God mandates is moral, implying that morality is entirely subjective upon the mind of God. You then went on to assert that I must believe in objective morals, when in fact I'm a moral nihilist. The rest of your argument went into a dismissal of the entire field of ethics. Such derision for philosophy might be expected, but given that you appeal to philosophy so often in the future arguments you make, it's rather surprising. You then asked if rape is morally evil. Evil is a value judgment above and beyond ethics, but we could appeal in this instance to dura lex sed lex, that the law is harsh, but it is the law. To say that rape is morally evil, I would need an objective grounding, as you quite rightly claim. However, I would agree with David Hume on this subject, that God offers no greater objective moral basis than any other source of authority, from the government to myself. You then gave the example of something that is counterintuitive to societal laws, white socks with a dinner suit. Now, being a Brit, I'm quite well versed with etiquette and how one should dress oneself, and whilst white socks may be frowned upon today, in the 50s they were considered rather dashing, and the only real hard and fast rule with fashion is that you should never wear socks that match either the colour of your shoes or the colour of your trousers. This humorous sidetrack ignored, you went on to say that atheists don't bash Satan. Well, that's true, but I don't really bash the other angels either, like Michael or Gabriel. Similarly, when criticising Apple, I don't blame Steve Wozniak for turtleneck jumpers. I blame Steve Jobs. Equally, on the historicity of Jesus, I'm surprised you didn't make any reference to the apologetics of C.S. Lewis, but you did make what could be considered a twisted argument that Lewis presents, an unprecedented authority to speak on God's behalf. I disagree. Such a claim was entirely precedented. Egypt and the pharaohs, Rome and the emperors. Almost every society had individuals speaking for God. You then went on to discuss the actual historicity itself, which, whilst mentioning none of the arguments, and indeed none of the historians who mentioned it, you implicitly ignored Josephus, Tacitus and Pliny the Younger, who were all worth mentioning in their own way. All were born 40 years after the death of Christ, and Josephus was working for the Romans, which would suggest that he should be a fairly objective source on the subject, but it's worth noting that they all related what people believed, not what they knew to have happened. Equally, Tacitus got Pontius Pilate's rank wrong, demonstrating that he was not writing from the Roman senatorial records. Pliny the Younger is especially worth noting because he disagreed with his uncle, Pliny the Elder, who was a contemporary of Christ. Equally, you didn't appeal to the works of Habermas on the resurrection, which is surprising because he is one of the best Christian scholars on the subject. One of my favourite authors. His dissertation in particular is well worth reading. You shuffled again onto the ontological argument, making no mention of Descartes, and the formulation you gave was that as offered by Anselm, which was quite summarily refuted by Aquinas in his book Summa Theologica. You may say that I'm appealing to authority, and that would be true, but I'll go on to argue myself. I would like to take a few seconds, however, to point out that Aquinas is not biased against Anselm on the issue. Both of them are saints. They're both pretty good Christians. As an example of how good a Christian Aquinas was, one of your future arguments, as I will discuss later, was originally Aquinas' argument. However, in the premise for your ontological argument, you said that I admit that it is possible for a Christian God to exist. I don't. In fact, I will argue the opposite. And to do so, I'm going to present the argument I presented earlier, an argument for the lack, or rather the logical impossibility of omnipotence. Now, we're going to return once again to the paradox of the stone. Can God create a stone he cannot lift? There are two alternatives. That he can, in which case he is capable of logical absurdities, in which case logic is subjective, and we live in a subjective universe. Secondly, that we resort to Descartes' response to the question that God is bound by what is logical. If it is true, then logic transcends God. The God transcending everything is a requirement of being deity. This renders the Christian God an incoherent object of study and therefore impossible. He necessarily does not exist. It's worth noting there is another argument against the ontological argument, which takes the form of satire. And it goes like this. 1. The creation of the world is the most marvelous achievement imaginable. 2. The merit of an achievement is the product of A, its intrinsic quality, and B, the ability of its creator. 3. The greater the disability or handicap of the creator, the more impressive the achievement. 4. The most formidable handicap for a creator would be non-existence. 5. Therefore, if we suppose that the universe is the product of an existent creator, we can conceive a greater being, namely one who created everything while not existing. 6. An existing God, therefore, would not be a being than which a greater being cannot be conceived, because an even more formidable and incredible creator would be a God which did not exist. Hence, God does not exist. As you can see from this, ontological arguments are open to a great deal of abuse, while still remaining logically coherent. Now, you went on to argue against naturalism in possibly the briefest speech I've ever heard on the subject. You appealed to Descartes' argument for the mind unknowingly. It's remarkable how often Descartes and Aquinas are mentioned in these arguments, because they are the two most significant thinkers on the topic. Descartes' argument for the mind goes something like this. You may have heard it before. Cogito ergo sum. I think, therefore I am. I can be certain that my mind exists, because I am the thing which is thinking. However, I cannot be sure that my body exists, because I have no objective evidence that it's real. What I am certain of and what I am not certain of cannot be the same thing. Therefore, the mind and the body are not the same. Now, this would be an issue to naturalism if naturalism didn't explain this. Naturalism argues that the mind arises from purely physical causes. This is part of naturalism and is not in any way a refutation of it, as you implied. You then moved on to the fine-tuning arguments, and this is where we get back to Aquinas. Fine-tuning is the fifth of Aquinas' 5 arguments, the first of which is the uncaused first cause, and the third of which is the unmoved mover. Funnily enough, you already argued against this earlier when you made reference to the anthropic principle. Is it possible that you haven't actually read the book or researched the principle itself? The fine-tuning argument appeals to the unlikeliness of life existing, but life existing predicates that those unlikely circumstances have been met. Besides, we are dealing in statements of truth and knowledge, not probability. You then went on to make statements about behavior, as if how a person acts dictates reality in the universe. This doesn't really make any sense unless you really believe in a subjective universe. Objective purpose is not the only driving force in behavior. For instance, you eat every day because your mind tells you you are hungry. This is as subjective as it gets. I enjoy discussion. I also desire each day to end each day better informed than when I started. This is part of the reason why I'm here. You made reference to prophecies. Well, for an entire book's prophecies to be invalidated, you only need to find one which did not come true. In this example, I will reference Ezekiel 30, where God tells us that Nebuchadnezzar will destroy Egypt. He never did. I'll end this by presenting an argument from metaphysics. It's quite a long one, and without text it might be hard to keep up, but since the text is locked, I've really got no choice but to present it orally. I'll do my best to keep it slow. Argument takes the form of two modus ponens arguments, each of which substantiate the premise of the future third argument. We'll start with the first. Premise 1. If the metaphysical primacy of consciousness is valid, then existence was created by a consciousness. Premise 2. To assert that a non-existent consciousness, something which exists, created existence itself is self-contradictory. Conclusion. Therefore, the metaphysical primacy of consciousness is invalid. The second argument. Premise 1. If the metaphysical primacy of consciousness is invalid, then the metaphysical primacy of existence is true. Premise 2. The metaphysical primacy of consciousness is invalid. Conclusion. Therefore, the metaphysical primacy of existence is true. The final argument, and the one that really matters. Premise 1. If the metaphysical primacy of existence is true, then a creator God cannot possibly exist. Premise 2. The metaphysical primacy of existence is true. Conclusion. Therefore, a creator God is impossible. This argument clearly adheres to modus ponens and is thus of the valid form. The argument is sound because premise 1 and premise 2 are true, and the conclusion clearly follows deductively from the preceding premises. Both this argument and the argument geared towards omnipotence are both logically valid and both invalidate a Christian God. I think, therefore, I've demonstrated quite concisely that not only are there good reasons to think that God does not exist, but that there are no good reasons to think that Christianity is true. Thank you for your time.
All right, as predicted, we didn't hear any arguments against God's existence. That's what I was waiting for. You messed up on the ontological argument. I'll point out your error there. You also messed up on the fine-tuning, well, you messed up on everything. So let's go through your errors and we'll talk about them. First of all, the very first thing you said out of the gate is you conceded that science has shifted into the direction of Christian philosophy. So it's good to see my atheist opponent being more theistic in his life. Also, you talked about Socrates predating Christ. Actually, Socrates doesn't predate Christ. As you know, Jesus Christ is eternal. So Jesus Christ was living even before he was in the tintly flesh of man. So you messed up there too. A couple mistakes you made there already. Now you talked about Stephen Hawking and how Stephen Hawking was trying to, I guess, posit an eternal universe. But you messed up there also because maybe you haven't studied Borde, Guth, and Vilenkin, three very famous cosmologists. Coincidentally, you're not going to like this, Mike. You're just digging yourself a deeper hole here. They were, I believe it was Vilenkin, they went to Hawking's birthday party. And I want to give you a quote what they said. It was almost like they popped out of a birthday cake and said, "Ta-da, Stephen Hawking, you're wrong." And all three of these cosmologists believe that Stephen Hawking is wrong. And here's what they said. They, if you go to ShockofGod.net and click Music Podcast area, you can, educate yourself on this. What they basically said is, all evidence now shows that the universe had a beginning. All evidence now shows the universe had a beginning. What's interesting, they did not say the preponderance of the evidence. They did not say most of the evidence, all evidence. So the cosmological argument clearly goes on my side of the debate. So Mike, you lost that one. Now on objective moral values, you bring up a type of Euthyphro argument and you say you're a moral nihilist or nihilist depending on what part of the country you're from. The problem, though, is when I asked you, is rape objectively evil, you did not really answer that question. You kind of evaded it in typical Richard Dawkins, Matt Dillahunty style. So we're still waiting for you to answer, is rape objectively evil? Very simple question. I thought you would answer it, but evidently you have a spine like your God, the spaghetti monster. So let's move on. So on objective moral values, he does not deny the premises. He doesn't give an argument against it. If God does not exist, then we wouldn't have these objective moral values. If objective moral values exist, then we would have God's existence. We would have a way to ground them. And you do kind of admit that you can't ground objective moral values on atheism. I'm recording this, so when you play it back on my YouTube channel, you'll be able to hear that you kind of conceded on atheism. You can't really ground objective moral values, but I don't think you really values yourself being a nihilist. You admitted it's true that you don't bash Satan. So I thought that was kind of funny. At least you admitted that, and that's true because we know that Satan is the atheist father. So you guys might remember on the objective moral values, here's how the argument went. Okay? The argument goes like this. If objective moral values exist, I want to go through a couple things with you, then God exists. If God did not exist, then we really wouldn't have objective moral values. Because on atheism, why would we have them? So think about it. Now I know he rejects objective moral values, and I was asking him, is rape objectively wrong? And he kind of evaded that. So when you get back on, Mike, if you could just simply answer yes or no, is rape objectively wrong? I know you're ashamed, probably. You don't want to say, in your opinion, it's not, because it makes atheism look more full of crapola than it already is. But I'd like to hear an answer on that. But the argument goes on the objective moral values, guys. He has not refuted any of the arguments. He agrees with them. Number one, if God did not exist, objective moral values and duties would not exist. But what we see here is that objective moral values and duties do exist. So it follows rationally, therefore, that God exists. And remember what I said, Mike, Louise Anthony, she said any argument for moral skepticism is going to depend upon premises which are less obvious than the reality of objective moral values themselves. And you haven't given us an argument. So objective moral values goes on my side of the debate. You don't disagree with what I say, but you don't give me an argument for it. So it follows rationally, therefore, that God exists. He admits it's true that he doesn't bash Satan. Now, what really blew me away is when we got to the argument on talking about Jesus Christ, he didn't address any of my arguments at all. I brought up on Sunday after his crucifixion, Jesus' tomb was found empty by a group of his women followers. I brought up on separate occasions different individuals and groups saw appearance of Jesus alive after his death. And I brought up the original disciples came to believe in the resurrection of Jesus. So my argument on Jesus Christ still stands very strong and steady. In fact, Mike, I want to thank you. You actually brought up other people that wrote about Jesus Christ, even adding more weight to the fact of my argument. Now, on the ontological argument, Mike, it's not my place to embarrass you or anything like that, but you said that I was using Anselm's ontological argument. I don't know if you've studied the ontological argument. You messed up. I was not using Anselm's ontological argument in this debate. I was using Plantinga's argument. So let me go through it again. So you messed up there too. The argument that Alvin Plantinga, and I'm sure you're familiar with him, brilliant person here, he says, it is possible that a maximally great being exists. Now, have we heard any arguments to show that God does not exist? No, I'm still waiting for them. If it is possible that a maximally great being exists, then a maximally great being exists in some possible world. If a maximally great being exists in some possible world, then it exists in every possible world. Now, I'm going to get to what Mike said. Mike, you used Richard Dawkins' argument. Mike, come on, really? You know that Richard Dawkins is the worst person that you want to use. I was just listening to this. Dr. William Lane Craig, if you go to shockforever.com and you look at the debate there where Dr. William Lane Craig has an empty chair there because we know Richard Dawkins is afraid to debate Dr. William Lane Craig. And you got this argument of a non-existent creator creating things from Richard Dawkins. Well, you're just proving my point. Mike, I'm telling you, man, you're just digging yourself a deeper hole again and again because you prove my point. It is logically inconsistent that there's such a being that exists and doesn't exist at the same time. How could the being create if he doesn't exist? How could he exist and not exist at the same time? You've basically proven my point. Mike, you're just digging yourself a deeper hole here, man. See, that's the whole point of Plantinga's ontological argument, is that it's logically consistent. Your argument, however, and I don't blame you personally because you borrowed it from Richard Dawkins, the most illogical person, probably the most illogical atheist out there. Of course, now he's an agnostic, so he's now admitted that God can exist, which he's all over the place. You don't want to use Richard Dawkins. He's one confused individual. I would suggest you guys go to reasonablefaith.org and listen to Dr. William Lane Craig. He was just talking about the argument that you gave, that you borrowed from Richard Dawkins, and he said that it's illogical because it's not logical to have a being that exists and doesn't exist at the same time. So you're just kind of proving what we're talking about here, that atheism is illogical. Now, you said the mind and body are not the same or something like that. I agree with that. That was my point exactly. See, when we are happy, our brain's not happy. We are happy. We have this state of mind of happiness. When we are sad, our brains aren't sad. We are sad. And this is why I brought up the near-death experiences, and I brought up mind and the ghost demonic realm, which you didn't hit on ghost and demonic activity and stuff. But my mom recently had surgery, and she had a hip surgery, and I was able to talk to a lot of the doctors. They're very wise, intelligent Christian doctors, by the way, and nurses, and they totally believe and have witnessed with proof and evidence near-death experiences. Now, I'd like to share one with you, because obviously atheism has totally lost this debate. I haven't heard even one argument against God's existence. But I think, Mike, the problem is you're using Richard Dawkins' arguments, and none of them really make sense. I want to talk to you about something. If you go to ShockofGod.net and go to Music Podcast, there's a whole seminar on near-death experiences, and I'm going to share one of them with you, and there's tons of them. Peer-reviewed proof and evidence of near-death experiences where people actually are able to go outside their body and know what's going on in another room and even see things. This is really hard for atheists to debunk. This is why I left atheism, why most people leave atheism after the age of 18. As you start looking at how atheism just doesn't make sense, right? Well, what happened, this woman had a heart attack. She went into the hospital, and while she's within the hospital, she has this out-of-body experience where she sees the very top of the roof of the hospital. It's a very, 15-story building hospital, and they brought her in on the ground floor. She didn't go up to the roof. And she talks about what she sees on the roof. She sees this giant tennis shoe, but the laces are tied underneath the shoe, like the tongue part, And so one of the nurses goes up there. And by the way, even atheist doctors have conceded that near-death experiences are real. So this really goes against atheist naturalism. This is why I brought up all those things, because it just overwhelms your argument, Mike. I got ghost demonic activity. I got how we have a mind, we have free will, we chose to come in here, we have near-death experiences. If those things weren't there, atheism might be able to fare better in debates, but it's just, you can't deny what's there. But anyway, so this lady ends up saying that she sees this big giant shoe with the laces tied and everything. So the nurse goes all the way up there, and she goes out onto the top of the building, like where there's a window where you can look, and she actually was able to see the actual shoe the way that the lady explained it. Now, this is just one of many. There's tons of these near-death experiences by people. So it shows that, how was this woman able to leave her body? I mean, if you have an idea, Mike, on how she did that, you can get on and explain it. But how was this woman able to leave her body her eyeballs didn't, if it was naturalism, then her eyeballs had to pop out of her head and walk up the steps and go look out the window. How was she able to leave her body and hover over her body and then hover up there and see these things? This is serious, guys. We're not here to play a game and just have arguments. We're looking at the truth, and the truth is we cannot deny the spiritual world exists. I had a male and female husband and wife paranormal investigation team come in here, and oh hey Juice, good to see you again, man. I'm in the middle of a debate, but I'll chat with you in a moment. And the wife was saying that she totally believes some of these demonic entities are evil. So I mean, come on, atheists, just give it up. You're not convincing anybody. The evidence is just not there for atheism. I still have not heard any arguments at all why we should believe that God doesn't exist. However, I went through like 11 different arguments. I went through the mind, the ghost demonic activity still remains solid. Objective values, you didn't really address that. You just kind of gave your opinion. Cosmological argument, you admitted that science has vindicated Christianity on that, and I appreciate that, Mike. And then on the fine-tuning, you didn't really give an argument against that. Robert Jastrow with NASA's Goddard Institute for Space Studies calls the fine-tuning, and go to ShockofGod.net, guys, and click links, and you'll see all the light-permitting constants there. This is scientific evidence. He admitted that, he said the fine-tuning is the most powerful evidence for the existence of God ever to come out of science. Now, Mike, you know Bart Ehrman, right? Bart Ehrman, he is not like a Christian, right? Even he admits, Bart Ehrman says the fine-tuning is really the most powerful argument. I don't really agree with him because I think there's other good arguments too, but Bart Ehrman does admit that it's the most powerful argument against atheism. I mean, you can't explain this fine-tuning by randomness. Okay, let's see what else you said. I just want to make sure. So the ontological argument, we talked about that, how the argument you're giving about a non-existent creator or whatever, that's a Richard Dawkins argument. That's not really your fault, but that's a total fail. Prophecy, you talked about prophecies in the Bible that haven't come true yet. Well, of course, I know there's prophecies that haven't come true yet, but I noticed you didn't want to talk about the prophecies that already have come true. You didn't address my argument. Look at the Isaiah prophecy about Jesus Christ, which was written before Jesus Christ was in the tintly flesh of man. I mean, the only way you probably can get around that is try to deny Jesus ever lived, but even that dodo bird Richard Dawkins won't go as far as to say the dodo bird Richard Dawkins won't go as far as to say Jesus never existed. So I'm telling you, Mike, it's hard. It's really hard I tried it when I was an atheist, to try to shoot holes within the fact that God exists. Anthony Flew tried it. He finally admitted that God exists. Peter Hitchens, the atheist, tried it. He finally admitted that God exists. There's just no arguments at all why we should believe that atheism is true. This is why atheism is a measly 3% of the world population, why 97% of the world are theists. I think the reason why that is because there's, oh hey Starwolf, Starwolf's the guy I'm supposed to debate next. So we're going to have a debate marathon tonight. But let me get off. Mike, even though you lost this debate and you were not able to provide any good arguments why we should believe God doesn't exist, all my arguments still stand strong. What I was looking for, Mike, was some reasons against God's existence. The arguments you gave, admitting that science has shifted into the direction of Christian philosophy and all these things that you gave, actually helped my side. You would have been better off not even speaking, but the arguments you gave, I've actually, and you brought up Josephus. Yeah, Josephus talks about Jesus Christ. I got no problem with that. But go ahead, Mike. You could have the last word, and then I have to debate Starwolf next. So hang in there, Starwolf.
Very gracious of you to offer me the last word. However, I must object to your brutal mischaracterization of everything I've said. Firstly, I presented at least 2 arguments for the non-existence of God, neither of which you even acknowledged or gave a response to. I'm not sure if you misunderstood them or didn't understand them. I can go over them again if you'd like. I'm also happy to give them to you in a textual form. I did say it would be kind of hard to keep up if they were presented orally. However, since you have a recording, you can look back over them at your leisure. I also pointed out at the start that the idea of a non-eternal universe started with the pre-Socratic philosophers. You misportrayed me as admitting that science moved towards a Christian position, when in fact science started with the position left to us by the pre-Socratic philosophers and stayed there. You also then tried to portray Hawking's view as being one for an eternal universe, when Hawking and his phi wave posits a non-eternal universe. I'm sorry to doubt you, but I have to. Were you even listening to what I was saying? I appreciate that I talk fast, and that for a non-British speaker, listening to someone pronounce all of their T's as harshly as I do can be disturbing, but please don't try and strawman me. There is nothing quite as frustrating as listening to a rebuttal that misses the target by a mile. On the morality question, I disagree that I evaded it at all. I think I stated quite clearly that I do not believe in objective moral wrongs. That is an answer to your question. If you disagree, then your question needs rephrased. We don't have objective moral values. You tried to derive an ought from an is. You did what Hume denounced. Objective moral values cannot be grounded in God any more or less than objective moral values can be grounded in non-existence of a God. You presented no argument in favor of objective moral values, but used them in the face of contention as the premise for an argument. Rape is subjectively evil. Rape is subjectively evil. Rape is subjectively evil. Rape is subjectively evil. It is not objectively evil. I think I've stated that quite clearly 3 times now. If you still misunderstand me, I can rephrase yet again. You then went on to discuss arguments for the historicity of Jesus, which I think, as I stated before, bears no relevance to the existence or non-existence of God. Only a presuppositionalist, when discussing theology with a non-presuppositionalist, would ever draw that assertion. However, since you want to discuss Scripture, I'm happy to. Biblical canon is really a point of embarrassment for Christianity. When defending it, people have to appeal to God's role in preserving the integrity of Scripture, because, simply put, the Christian institution's attempts to preserve the integrity of Scripture were abysmal. The Council of Hippo's criteria for the selection of books to be included in the canon were grounded in theological decisions made at the Council of Nicaea in 325, not in any objective sense trying to decide which Gospels were closest to the time or which were most accurate. You then went on to say that essentially I used an argument that Dawkins used. I wouldn't be aware, I haven't read any of Dawkins' books. As best as I'm aware, I haven't used any of Dawkins' arguments, all of them being either my own or I owe to further and older atheistic philosophers. It's interesting you mentioned verbatim, because the ontological argument that you presented is taken by Plantinga from Anselm's Proslogion Volume 2 verbatim. So don't try and portray me as ignoring the argument. I addressed it word for word. Anselm's formulation is the classic. Descartes' is far simpler, going along the lines of, I define God as perfect. Necessary existence is a perfection, therefore God necessarily exists, therefore God exists. Such a watered-down ontological argument offers itself even more to criticism, leading some to believe that it was offered as satire. You then tried to pick holes in the ontological argument that I offered, citing the existence-non-existence duality that's used that is actually used to demonstrate the errancy of ontological conclusions, that you can, without contravening logic, demonstrate a logical absurdity. Ontological arguments are undermined by this argument, as you very rightly pointed out. You mentioned the distinction between mind and brain without making any connection between it and the existence or non-existence of God. As I said before, the duality of the two do not in any way contravene uniformitarianism, naturalism, or materialism. They're not in conflict, or they explain each other quite well. You then appealed to anecdotal evidence without even a reference. I'm quite happy to address a source where a woman says that she saw shoes on the roof in an out-of-body experience. However, to relay it yourself, I can merely make up a story of how I went and saw the Hindu gods. It really doesn't do anything for you. You then tried to say that because I only offered one example of a non-true prophecy, that it would come true in the future. That'll be kind of hard, because, you see, the individual who was meant to destroy Egypt is now dead. Unless, post-trib, Nebuchadnezzar is going to go on a rampage and destroy Egypt ad hoc, I really don't see how this prophecy will ever come true. You also highlighted that it was only one argument. That's true. However, if one prophecy is false, like with uniformitarianism, the idea of prophecy is false. Just one and the whole stack of cards come tumbling down. There is a possible alternative, that the Bible is not inerrant, that this shouldn't actually be in Scripture, this is not divine revelation, that Ezekiel 30 is itself inerrant, but the rest of the Bible is inerrant. However, we then open ourselves up to some really quite harsh biblical exegesis, whereby we have to analyze quite closely each verse to decide whether or not they are Scripture. You now want to demonstrate that I used an argument verbatim from Dawkins. I'll hand over to you so that you can hopefully demonstrate this.
Mike, we're kind of waiting for you to give us some arguments against God's existence, but I'm writing down everything you're saying, and believe me, I'm trying to find some type of argument against God's existence. You're just not giving me any. First of all, you said you misunderstood me when I said science moved to Christianity. No, I didn't. You said it on audio. When I upload this to my YouTube channel, you'll be able to hear it. You actually said those words, that science moved closer to Christianity, you know, the Christian worldview. You'll hear it. So I wouldn't say it if you didn't say it. I got a very good memory. When an atheist concedes that science moved closer to Christianity, believe me, I pay attention. So you'll hear that. So on that part, you and I just disagree. You did say it. Now you're denying you said it, but you did say it. Now, you said objective morals cannot be grounded in God. Oh, sure they can. They can't be grounded in atheism, though. They can be grounded in God through divine commands. You know this, Mike. Come on, Mike. You know this. This is Theology 101, Debate 101. Remember the command, you shall love your God with all your heart, soul, and mind, love your neighbor as yourself. So we have these divine commands through God, and we know God's nature. But on atheism, even you would admit, I asked you, well, you did admit it. I asked you, is rape objectively wrong? You said no. Mike, that's bad, dude. I hope your mom isn't going to wash her mouth out with soap for saying that. That's shameful. Mike, listen closely. In your country, it's illegal also. So I don't think you should be going around saying stuff like that. That's the thing about atheism. It kind of promotes things that are also illegal. But, you know, Mike, I was in a debate, and Mike, I got to debate Star Wolf 64, okay, also next. But I still want to respect you. I want to address this. You said that Plantinga and Anselm's ontological argument are exactly the same, but not. You're wrong again. Mike, you just keep digging yourself a deeper hole, man. Look, Plantinga's version of the argument conceives of a God which is a being which is, listen, maximally excellent in every possible world. Plantinga, he takes this maximal excellence to include such properties as omniscience, omnipotence, and moral perfection. So what he says, Mike, is a being which has maximal excellence in every possible world would have what Plantinga calls maximal greatness. So if you look at Anselm's, you know, ontological argument, you know, I like Anselm's ontological argument and Plantinga's, but yours makes no sense to say there's a non-existent being that creates things. Mike, how could you not see that that's illogical? And then you say, and I recorded this, you said, yes, you rightfully pointed out the error on the ontological argument. Yeah, well, you used an ontological argument that I didn't use. You used an atheist ontological argument, which is why atheism is madness in its purest form. Only in atheism, Mike, would you bring yourself to actually think it makes sense to use an argument that you have a non-existent being that tries to create things. I can get a 12-year-old child, if their mind hasn't been ruined by atheism yet, and I could show them, do you think this makes sense to you, Mike's ontological argument, where he's positing a non-existent being creating things? The 12-year-old child would even be able to understand it as long as they haven't been ruined by the madness of atheism. They would say, well, how could that be possible? That's illogical. And I appreciate you pointing out how illogical atheism is. But here, if you guys go to shockforever.com and look for the video, type in crowd laughs at Richard Dawkins, okay? Crowd laughs at Richard Dawkins. You'll see a video there of Craig basically talking to Richard Dawkins, but there's an empty chair there because Dawkins is afraid to debate Craig, which we all know, because he has a spine like his God, the spaghetti monster. And Craig brings up the ontological argument, which is exactly the same one that Mike brought up. The exact same one. So, Mike, maybe you got it from someone else that got it from Richard Dawkins, which you don't want to do that. I mean, Richard Dawkins he's just a nut. So let's move on to the, and on the out-of-body experience, you guys want to hear Mike's argument against out-of-body experiences? Here's what he said. He said, well, I could say I went and saw the Hindu gods. Mike, really? Come on, Mike. That's a horrible argument against out-of-body experience. And you don't provide any evidence of it. How can you say that that's the same as documented peer-reviewed evidence? Even atheists are admitting it, that out-of-body experiences, near-death experiences are true. Look, you guys be the judge. You be the judge. Go to ShockofGod.net, click Music Podcast, look for the near-death experiences audio. You could download it for free. And, you know, Mike, you're just wrong on this, man. This is another reason why I left atheism, the intellectual bankruptcy of it, you know. Atheism is intellectually bankrupt. But the last thing I want to say, and Star Wolf, I know you want to debate next, man. The last thing I want to say is this. He talked about the Bible, okay? Mike, listen, If the Bible did not exist, God would still exist. The Christian view is not that the Bible brings God into existence. We believe God exists. We have this knowledge of God's existence, whether the Bible existed or not. The Bible is just more proof and evidence. I would challenge people, go look at the prophecy, it's called the 1948 prophecy of Israel. You can't bring up any other argument like this where this prophecy is so detailed, the odds of which are a gazillion to one that it would happen. Israel is the only country in world history that through prophecy was prophesied to be gathered again to herself, and in 1948 it happened. So I think if we're rational and intelligent and you look at the lack of evidence that atheism has, I mean, look, even now Matt Dillahunty on the Atheist Experience Show admits that Jesus could have risen from the dead. It's over, guys. The refrigerator's closed, the Jello's jiggling. Atheism's toast. You got Richard Dawkins front sliding from atheism to, he's not backsliding, he went from atheism to agnosticism. So guys, just to kind of sum up what happened here, we asked for arguments against God's existence. We didn't hear any. He brought up an ontological argument which is irrational about an existent God that doesn't exist. Okay, that's how stupid atheism is. We brought up the mind. He didn't give us any arguments against how we have a mind. We brought up ghost demonic activity. He didn't even touch on that. So mind and ghost and demonic activity go on my side of the argument. On objective values, he just flat out denied that objective values are wrong. And I'm quoting you, Mike, he said that rape is not objectively wrong. So I'll leave it up to the audience that listens to this debate on my YouTube channel. Who would you trust with your loved one? What worldview do you think is more loving and trusting? One that says it is objectively evil to rape, or Mike's atheist worldview that says, no, it's not. It's not objectively evil. I'll leave it up to you to decide which one you think is more loving and caring. And we do also know that the religious people give more money to charity also, so we know who really cares the most. Atheists have one of the highest suicide rates in the world. They're not happy. Why would they kill themselves off in numbers? Friends don't let friends become atheists. We love the atheists. Mike, we love you. You've got to leave atheism, though, man, before it rots your brain any more than it already is. I mean, it's just madness. The ontological argument, he brought that up, you know, about a non-existent God creating things. He actually buries himself with that because he's proving my point that the ontological argument is rational, but his, based on his atheist views, is not. He proved my point. On the fine-tuning, he didn't have any argument against that. Robert Jastrow says the fine-tuning of the universe is the most, and he's with NASA's Goddard Institute for Space Studies, he says it's the most powerful evidence for the existence of God ever to come out of science. On Jesus Christ, the three arguments I brought up, he didn't address any of them. Why? Because he knows they're true. On prophecy, he didn't deny the prophecies that I brought up came true. He said, well, there's prophecies that didn't come true, but he didn't give any arguments against it. And I admitted that there are prophecies that still are going to come true. There's also things called dual prophecies, like the prophecy in Revelation where you have the Antichrist coming. It's like a dual prophecy. Go to ShockofGod.net, click Entire Audio Bible for free, and get yourself a free audio Bible, and it'll go through that. But anyways, the debate was on the topic, does God exist? It wasn't really on passages of the Bible he and I disagree with, but that's fine. Near-death experiences, he talked about, what did he talk about again? Something about, on the near-death experience, oh yeah, he said, well, he could say he went and saw the Hindu gods. Yeah, but that doesn't address the fact of the evidence of the near-death experiences. We talked about how Christians experience God. He didn't give us any defeater against our experiential reality. And the lack of any defeater, the Christian is rational to continue being Christian, which is, of course, what Christians will keep doing. On DNA, I talked about how that is empirical proof of design. He didn't talk about that. I talked about the 150 million plus murders under the evil, not subjective like Mike would say, but the objectively evil atheist regimes of Stalin, Mao, Pol Pot, Kim Jong-il, the Khmer Rouge, and more. 150 million brutal murders, rapes, and atrocities under the evil atheist regimes. Atheists, you own that. All right. Guys, watch for this debate on shockforever.com, my Shock of God channel. This is now number 72 debate. The atheist just cannot show that God does not exist. In fact, Mike, when you play back the debate, you'll realize that Christianity just won another one. So I appreciate you, Mike, for helping theism grow some more. Now, StarWolf64, now he and I have to have a debate, and I'm going to make this one a lot shorter. All right, StarWolf, do you have your mic ready to clickety-click? Yeah, go ahead, Mike. Okay, but hold on. Let StarWolf test his mic first. Go ahead, Star.
Shock, can you hear me? Shock? Can you type in the chat box if you can hear me? Because that would be a good indicator that my mic is working. I checked it earlier, but just to be sure.
Yeah, we can hear you, but hold on. Mike wanted to get back on. Yeah, Mike, you know, you don't have to answer this question, but I am so curious how you would answer this. This is up to you, okay? When you get back on, you're saying that rape is subjective, which means that it would be okay in some instances. Would you give me an instance, because I can't think of any instance when rape would be okay. Would you give me an instance where rape would be okay, because you said that it's subjective, so that means that it's okay in some instances. I can't think of any. We could hear you, by the way, Starwolf. So Mike, in what instance would rape be okay, since you believe that it's okay in some instances?
I'll address your final question right at the very end. Firstly, you try to ground morality in divine commands, whilst making no argument as to why divine commands are able to dictate what is moral. Once again, you are merely appealing to authority. God is no more authoritative on this subject than I am, or the law. You appeal again to dura lex sed lex, not ethics. You're appealing to legality, not morality. Martin Luther King Jr. would disagree with you quite stridently on the subject. You then try to say that Plantinga's argument is different from Anselm's. It's not. Read Anselm's Proslogion Volume 2. The argument is lifted verbatim from there. The ontological argument in response to it, that you then dismissed, is offered by Thomas Aquinas, a man whose philosophy you quote regularly in your argument, using both his first and fifth arguments. The argument is also satire. I don't see how you can miss this distinction between genuine conjecture and satire. The argument is not meant to demonstrate that a God does not exist. It is meant to demonstrate that ontological arguments can be used to demonstrate logical absurdities without contravening logic themselves. I hope you haven't misunderstood yet again. You also didn't point out where I used an argument from Dawkins. The arguments I used were derived from Thomas Aquinas' Summa Theologica. The argument against out-of-body experiences is an argument against all anecdotes. It isn't an argument against the existence of God. The Bible argument I related was in response to your tales related to the resurrection as appealed to by Habermas and Lewis. So to say that I did not address your claims regarding Christ is ridiculous. Equally, I referenced Pliny the Elder and his dismissal of the Christian claims, Tacitus and his incorrect attribution of rank to Pontius Pilate. He wasn't quoting from the records, and indeed the weakness of the biblical canon. You then appealed to prophecy, again, despite conceding, I believe, that there are certain prophecies that have not yet come true. However, you then went on to say that these prophecies may come true in the future. I'll repeat myself again. The prophecy made in Ezekiel 30 can never come true, because Nebuchadnezzar is dead. Now, I understand this may not be a huge problem for someone who believes in resurrection, but the idea that God will bring back Nebuchadnezzar, presumably sometime before the tribulation, just to destroy Egypt seems a little absurd. Now, this is your question word for word. Ellipsis, saying that rape is subjective, meaning that it would be okay in some instances. Can you give me an instance where it would be okay? You're misusing the words subjective and objective. What you should have been using is universally and generally, essentially ontological versus teleological, for those of you who understand the distinction between the two. Objective and subjective relates to whether or not the truth of a claim is dependent upon an individual's perspective or feelings or desires. Essentially, whether or not it is relative or absolute. So, when I say that rape is subjectively wrong, I mean it is universally subjectively wrong. Not that it is generally objectively wrong, not that it is generally subjectively wrong, but that it is universally subjectively wrong. Otherwise, I would not make the statement. So for you to try and repaint the word subjective to mean generally and objective to mean universally is intellectually dishonest on your part, an attempt at equivocation. Hopefully you'll never do it again, but I don't have much faith in that. I'll hand over to you, Shock, and Star Fox for the next evening's events. Take care, everyone, and a Merry Saturnalia.
Well, we still haven't heard any arguments against God's existence. So let me go through what you said again. I'm telling you, you're just wrong. Look at what Alvin Planiga says, and look at the other ontological arguments. But finally, you admitted something we could agree on. You said that your ontological argument was satire. In other words, you were just joking around. It wasn't serious. And on that, Mike, we can't agree. But all your arguments were satire. So I don't think you win any debates by using satire trying to prove that atheism is true. That's the thing. That's what Dr. William Lane Craig was bringing this up. He brought up your argument, which you got from Richard Dawkins. If you look up, go to shockforever.com, look up the video, Crowd Laughs at Dawkins. Dawkins brought up that argument about a non-existent creator. Well, that's just stupid, Mike. I can't believe that you would make such an elementary school mistake and bring that up. That's why I'm trying to give you the benefit of the doubt, saying that you got it from Dawkins. Hold on, Star, we're going to debate next. Now, the other mistake you made is you were saying you cannot ground objective values with God. Yes, you can. You're just wrong. He has divine commands. Thou shalt love thy neighbor as yourself. You shall love your Lord God with all your heart, soul, and mind. Well, why can God do that, you're saying? God is the author and creator of life. God is the creator of the universe. You're not, and I'm not. So if you and I are going down the street, Mike, let's say you and I are going down the street, and some, like that atheist guy, Jared Loftner, remember the guy that went and shot that lady in the face and everything? On your worldview, what's really sick about atheism is there's nothing objectively wrong with what he did. And I'm sorry, Mike, I'm just not going to be involved with a worldview that is evil like atheism is. You should be ashamed of yourself to be involved with a worldview like that. One day you'll grow up. But on the atheist worldview, what Hitler did, there's nothing wrong with that. On the atheist worldview, what atheist Jared Loftner did when he shot that woman in the face point blank, there's nothing wrong with that. Atheism is evil. And I'm just going to tell the truth, it's evil. Now, let me give you another example. Let's say Mike and I are going down the street and Jared Loftner, the atheist, decides that he's going to take our life. Well, wait a minute. He doesn't have ownership of our life. Only God can take our life. God is the potter, we're the clay. He has rights over our life. Your life too, Mike, and my life too. So the atheist that says they want to become God and they want to go ahead and make their own rules, this is what's so dangerous about atheism. Do you know it was communism, atheism, that is responsible for more evil within our recent lifetime than anything? The evil atheist regimes of Stalin, Pol Pot, Mao, Kim Jong-il, the Khmer Rouge, over 150 million people brutally murdered and raped because of your type of worldview, Mike. Your worldview sucks. All right, so let me talk. But Mike, this is going to be a great debate. I can't wait to put it on YouTube. Next time, please come prepared with some arguments against God's existence. But I do appreciate you saying that science has moved closer to the Christian worldview.